Hi, my name is Gibson, and I'm the co-owner and creator of the Personal Development School. This is your daily breakthrough video, and in this video, I want to talk about this concept or idea that we've been discussing in this series of hyper independence as a dismissive avoidant. And if you haven't seen the earlier parts of this series, this is really about the differences between codependency, hyper independence, and healthy interdependence, which is really what we're seeking. And it's essentially, I can have me and relationship to self, and I can have a beautiful, empowered relationship to you as well. And so this is really what we're looking to bring into balance. And there's a lot of myths or ideas that like codependency is really good as long as both parties are meeting each other's needs consistently and perfectly. And that's not true. And, there's also these myths that it's great to not need anybody and to really just cut ourselves off from other people and be hyper independent. And that's not true either. Anything out of balance, anything that's a polarity or an extreme, as a general rule, usually needs to be brought back into balance and harmony, especially within relationship dynamics. So we're going to talk about in this video some of the characteristics and what the experience is like and the root causes of what a dismissive avoidant feels like when they're in a space of hyper independence, and then some qualities that are needed, or I guess steps or strategies that are needed to basically bring this individual back into balance and to create healthy interdependence in a relationship dynamic. So before I dive into all of this stuff, as I've mentioned in the previous parts of this series, this is such an important topic. And if it's something you find yourself struggling with, we created a bundle in our school just for this specific topic. So basically we have a codependency course, we have a discover and embrace your subconscious personal needs. So really understanding and defining your sense of self, an emotional mastery course that has a lot to do with our belief reprogramming, but also learning how to self-soothe is a huge part or component of that course. Then we have a strengthening self-identity course, like how to bring yourself out into the world, and a boundaries course. And all of these things together will really help you at a root level transform any codependent or hyper-independent patterns at really the most profound level and engage the subconscious mind in the process. So if you're interested, we have that. We have our with you discount going on right now for 25% off of that, as well as 25% off any, individual course purchase or any like 3, 6, 12-month purchase as a membership inside of the school, which gives you access to all of the courses, 30 or 35 or so plus, as well as all the previous webinars, our ongoing 4 live calls every single week with myself, and sometimes with special guests, and as well our Discord chat channel, our community space, our members forum, all of those things that really help us create that sense of community in there. So stay tuned for that. There's a link in the description box below for that. I'll also put a link on this video. But let's really have the conversation about hyper independence as a dismissive avoidant. So we know its polar opposite is basically this excessive emotional or psychological reliance on a partner, but really in a way where it blurs the lines between boundaries of self and other. And this can result in unhealthy exchange and imbalances in a relationship dynamic. And we really have talked about how codependency is essentially other obliterates self, like other takes so much precedence over self that sense of self sort of goes out the window. But when we talk about hyper independence, it's really about self obliterating others. And this isn't necessarily from a perspective of like somebody trying to obliterate another person or it being this like harsh, premeditated awful thing. But this has a lot to do with basically the focus of self is so important, and it's taking such precedence to the individual that this person loses their capacity to properly see, hear, understand, or be focused on other people's needs. And so they're not treating them equally or taking them into equal consideration. And one thing that we know is that this often takes place for all human beings when somebody's in a greater state of like fight or flight or survival in terms of how they're perceiving the world. Because if you can imagine, even if you're the most secure person, if you think all of a sudden, there's a matter of survival and something's happening where you have to survive, the natural way the brain copes with experiences like that is to become hyper focused on a person's survival needs. And often a dismissive avoidant growing up in a childhood or a household or with caregivers who neglected certain baseline needs, like emotional nurturing and connection, often this person that actually trips their nervous system and sort of puts them in a fight or flight state that they maintain at somewhat of a low level throughout the course of life, and is a natural byproduct of that. And by the way, until you reprogram your attachment style, and then that changes. But what that does to a person's nervous system is it also creates these patterns of behavior where this person's more survival oriented. And if you pay close attention, a lot of times dismissive avoidants are really like valuing efficiency, really trying to like hurry and get things done. And they're hoarding their resources. They don't want to share. They are very self-focused. They can seem selfish, but everybody's going to have those characteristics if they're in constant fight or flight to a certain degree. And this is very common amongst a dismissive avoidant attachment style individual. So they have, as a byproduct of this, the self-obliterating others, like taking such precedence over other people. Now, when we talk about people-pleasing dismissive avoidance, in some forms, we can have codependent dismissive avoidance, and they can be micromanaging people's feelings, but they're still putting their survival needs ahead of other people when it really boils down, because they associate that they have to soothe themselves. They've had to take care of themselves. Nobody was really there to do that for them. And because of those belief systems and patterns, usually they're going to be the ones to feel like we really, have to fend for ourselves at the end of the day. So when we talk about hyperindependence, separate from codependency, like you'll see codependency often involves the belief that others are responsible for my feelings, or I'm responsible for other people's feelings, or both, right? Or, we have to take care of other people and often play the caretaker role. A lot of those dynamics are at play, but with a dismissive avoidant and their hyperindependence, often what you'll see is that a lot of the belief patterns that exist for this individual is that closeness is a threat. And closeness triggers my ability to survive as a person. Like usually there's a big piece where somebody at some point in time associated closeness as being triggering of feelings of shame, frustration, fear, agitation. And the underlying beliefs with this are fear of loss of sense of self. Okay, so if I feel like somebody's getting too close and infringing on my sense of self or boundaries, I actually associate that as, hey, my sense of self is what's helped me survive all this time. I stay in that space and hyper-focus there because it's allowing me to stay surviving. And if you're infringing on that, it's actually a survival threat to the subconscious mind at a deep, deep level. So fear of loss of self, fear of loss of independence, also associated with survival, fear of loss of freedom and autonomy. And remember, like freedom and autonomy were really how the dismissive avoidant soothed, right? Like that individual learned to self-soothe, and that provided relief. And so loss of freedom and autonomy is associated to the subconscious mind as loss of ability to soothe and regulate oneself, which is why you'll see like the dismissive avoidant really wants to like have that space carved out and that time carved out, because that's their time to sort of bring themselves back into balance. And then there's also a fear of loss of control over themselves or their environment to a certain degree, which again is how they felt safe when they were missing safety, when basic needs for attachment and emotional nurturing weren't met to the degree that they could have been. And so this, again, is what made them feel safe in childhood. So these things are being taken away from a perceptual perspective. So they perceive that these things are being taken away when closeness, vulnerability, deep attachment, emotional connection, and bonding start to come in. There's a perception that it's like, oh my goodness, it's that or me and my safety. And so coming back to healthy interdependence for this individual requires breaking a lot of those beliefs, breaking those core beliefs around connection equals loss of self and autonomy and ability to soothe and safety and control, right? And so those beliefs need to be changed. And it needs to be seen by the dismissive avoidant that you can be vulnerable and still be safe, which really means learning to feel safe in and with oneself while in a relationship dynamic. And this is extremely important. And then what this also requires, which is so important, is a dismissive avoidant needs to learn to get to know themselves beyond their survival needs. So when they can like regulate their nervous system, get out of fight or flight, which really has to do with a lot of like somatic work, recognizing your feelings, but most importantly, really reprogramming these core beliefs that keep you in fight or flight in the first place, because these beliefs are sort of providing this perceptual lens you see the world through. And if those things are impacting that, that's constantly going to be triggering a person to stay in fight or flight, if that makes sense. Like if I think people are unsafe, for example, or closeness to people is unsafe, and then I go out into the world and I'm around people, I'm going to have this belief tripped, which is then going to cause me to feel a certain degree of fear-based emotion, because I'm seeing the world through that lens and that belief is activated. And then as soon as I'm in that emotional state, now I have these cortisol responses and norepinephrine responses, and that signals my nervous system to be on high alert, right? So it's sort of like if we can wipe out the beliefs, then it has this net impact or like domino effect going forward. But you can also do a lot of nervous system regulation work. Like you can sort of dissect or like change those patterns from different spaces. It doesn't just have to be from the belief space. It can be from the body space. It can be by regulating the nervous system through things like breath work. You can sort of enter into reprogramming any part, but we have to do that belief work. Otherwise, we're still just coping from every other space, if that makes sense. Like if you're regulating your nervous system through breath work every time you're triggered around people, then that's great. That's going to calm you down. But then you're going to go back to being around people the next day and have the same problem activated all over again. So you can't leave out that belief reprogramming at the subconscious level. So that's huge. And then a lot of this also requires getting to know self in terms of like, what are my emotional needs as a human being for connection from other people? What are my relational needs? And really identifying those things so that they can be communicated and brought into a relationship. And that way, a dismissive avoidant who usually carries another big belief, which results in hyperindependence, that, nobody can meet my needs. Only I can do that. That way, if you have that belief, you don't go into relationships and then you don't even voice your needs or express your needs or think about your needs in a relationship dynamic. Others usually do, especially more securely attached people. And then you always have this perceived imbalance, which always creates resentment and then the need to push away to get your needs met from yourself because you don't think that you can get them met in a relationship. And so it's another really important component that needs to be shifted and regulated. And it starts with doing that inner work with the sense of self. So these are some really important starting points. There's so much more to say about this. We talk a lot about this in the Dismissive Avoidant Reprogramming courses, our intro and our advanced, which sort of encompasses the 6 stages of a relationship. But we do a really deep dive into this in that like codependency bundle that we were discussing at the beginning of this video. So I hope this all makes sense. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks for being a part of watching this series. I hope that it resonated with you. If you haven't seen the other parts of it, go and check out codependency and the experience as an FA, as an anxious preoccupied, and then also the differences between hyperindependence, codependency, and healthy interdependence. So thank you so much for being here. Please like, share, and subscribe if you're getting a lot of value out of this channel, and I will see you in the next video.